Hello everybody, JGC Anime here, and today we are here to review Mob Psycho 100 Season 3, the final season of Mob. And I'm just gonna say this straight out, this has got to be my favorite season of Mob Psycho 100. With maybe like one or two storylines here and there not really being that interesting to me, a majority of the season, like a solid like 10 or so episodes, were genuinely phenomenal. They were just genuinely fantastic, and I just have a lot to say, so yeah, without further ado, let's just hop right into this. So, what is the story of Mob Season 3? Basically, the way it all starts off is Mob is starting to question where he's gonna go as he gets older, and he starts to wonder what he should do, and a lot of different things are conflicting with him, and he's trying to figure out who he is. And that's how things start before we slowly start to kind of progress through different things, and yeah. So, that was not a very good description of what to say happens in this season, but we're just gonna roll with it. So yeah, some spoiler-free thoughts. I really love this. It was just so emotional. Like, I can't, without spoiling anything, I can't really help but talk about this one storyline that really surprised me, and that is a storyline that focuses on Dimple. When I saw Dimple in season 1, I didn't like him that much. In fact, I found him a bit annoying. I honestly thought he was a character that was just gonna be in the background being kind of annoying. And in season 2, he doesn't really do too much. He doesn't really affect the plot that much at all, with like very few instances being kind of important but not super important. But in this season, he has a front and center role in one of the storylines, and it's honestly got to be one of my favorite storylines in all of Mob Psycho 100. It might even be my #1 favorite storyline, because it just got me so emotionally invested in the connection between Mob and Dimple, and I couldn't help but love it, as when it was over, all I felt was just kind of sadness towards Dimple, and it made me actually feel sympathy towards him, and made me realize maybe Dimple's not that bad of a character, and I honestly started to really respect him. And yeah, it's definitely highlighted Dimple a lot better, as he isn't the only one who gets a lot of focus in the season, but also Shigeo/Mob also gets a lot of attention in this, as he's reaching different conflictions throughout the story before the finale happens, which I can go about that in the spoiler section, which is a fantastic finale. I'm just amazed at how emotional this season got me. Like, up to this point, yeah, there were parts where I enjoyed Mob Psycho, but I never thought of a moment where I actually got like all teary-eyed, actually felt like I almost wanted to cry. But this season does exactly that. There are a few instances in this story where I genuinely almost wanted to kind of cry just by how emotional everything was feeling at that moment. And it was so fantastic. And I will say, there are some complaints. There's this one storyline that I could talk about in the spoiler section that I didn't like that much. In fact, even though it was kind of good for the most part, once it gets to like the last 8 or so minutes of that story arc, it kind of got kind of dumb. And I actually kind of hated it, but as I said before, we'll talk about that in the spoiler section. Just overall, with Mob and Dimple being the more major focuses over everything else, this was a fantastic season. They did a great job as main characters, and I genuinely think this was so good, and it's definitely my favorite season of Mob Psycho 100, which is kind of crazy considering it's the last season of Mob Psycho 100. It's the finale, and I think they did a great job with this. Although, I will say something, it was hard to adjust to some of the voices, since I watched this show in dub, because I just think the English voices sound better. In my opinion, I thought they sounded better, so I ended up watching this in dub. However, there was this big issue during the dubbing of this show for season 3 that caused a lot of the voice cast to be recast who wouldn't agree to all of Crunchyroll and Funimation's terms. And that included the voice actor who played the main man himself, Mob. And the voice isn't bad. In fact, after a few episodes, I got used to it. But he wasn't the only one who was replaced, as there were a few other characters, but I think he's the only one I could think of where the voice actor they used to replace him was a bit off. Like, I thought some of the others were actually good recastings, but with Mob in particular, Mob's voice was iffy. I got used to it over time, and I think it helped when I thought of it as he was going through puberty and his voice was deepening, since that's kind of the vibe it gave off. But it definitely was a bit off-putting. Most of the voices did stay though, including Reagan, who I know there was some stuff revolving around Reagan's voice actor for a time, but I think he did a fantastic job in this final season. Just, he always brings his all, and I really love the energy. I really think that the voice actors, for the most part, actually did a decent job. Just took a bit of time to get used to. Once I got used to all the new voices, it was easy, and I found myself thoroughly enjoying the show. But yeah, that's all I can really say without spoiling anything, so we're just gonna hop into the spoiler section now. Here's a timestamp to when the spoilers end, and we reach the conclusion of this video. If you have seen Mob Season 3, I'd recommend sticking around to hear my thoughts, but if you haven't, just skip to the end so you don't get any spoilers. But again, if you have seen it, I recommend sticking around so you can hear my thoughts. So yeah, I'm gonna catch up from 5, and then I'm gonna enter the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is Dimple's story, where he ends up using his brainwashing abilities to make everybody worship the giant broccoli that Mob made sprout at the beginning, or not beginning of the season, it was at the end of the season of season 2. He had them all worship this broccoli, and it's up to Mob to stop him. And it's this whole thing where you think Dimple's kind of gone off the deep end. It started to kind of go evil again. But then Mob realizes it's just that he wanted a friend to talk about his ambitions with. He had someone he wanted to share the spotlight with, but that person was rejecting all of his ambitions and all of his goals. And it was really interesting since in the end, Dimple, a character who originally was just super evil and messed up in the head, it turns out all he really wanted was a friend. And Mob accepted him like that. He accepted him as a friend, and I thought that was a really good storyline, as once Dimple becomes like God Dimple, he ends up protecting Mob and ends up trying to do all kinds of things to protect him when the tree goes haywire and starts attacking him and Mob. And it's almost kind of sad how the death scene plays out, because it's built up as Dimple's death scene near the end. And honestly, had I not been spoiled about like the final episode, I would have thought he was gone. I would have thought he was dead. But as I said, I was spoiled about that last little bit. I only was spoiled about episode 12, so I wasn't spoiled about the rest. So it was still an incredibly enjoyable season. In fact, episode 12 was good, still good, even after the spoilers. It was still really good. And yeah, Dimple's storyline really, really drew me in. I really liked it, and it's very surprising to me since, as I said before, I didn't really like Dimple too much before, but I think he's becoming one of my favorite characters just through that one storyline alone. And yeah, so moving on to some stuff I wasn't a big fan of, there would be the first episode that is still good, but it was a bit off, because as I mentioned, I watched this dubbed, and it took a lot of time to sit through that episode to get used to the new voices, since a lot of them were very off-putting, but it still wasn't bad. And episode 2 was quite enjoyable as well, and the whole Dimple storyline, as I said, was great. But the thing that kind of put me off the most wasn't even a part of the voices, it was the arc, and that was the little mini arc about the telepathy club trying to find aliens. I had hoped the story would kind of be them trying to find aliens, but failing because, you know, aliens don't actually exist, yada yada yada. But then they pull a last minute thing saying, oh yeah, aliens do exist, and they're here to invite you on a little fun trip before you have to go back to Earth. And that got kind of trippy real fast, and I think it's probably one of the most awkward things I've sat through when it comes to Mob. Like, when I was sitting through that, while everyone else might have been enjoying it and thought it was fun, I was just kind of uncomfortable. Like, I was genuinely just feeling very awkward as we were watching them interact. It wasn't the worst thing ever, but it definitely wasn't my favorite thing ever. And things did not really help when one of the characters, the character known as Inokawa, ends up getting sent off with the aliens and lives there for a bit before kind of forgetting everything as he returns to Earth. And I just felt like the writer was on drugs when he wrote that, because it's just such an odd series of events. Like, it's an odd series of events where I just can't really follow what the heck is happening. Like, what is happening right now? And it's definitely by far one of the most awkward things I've sat through with Mob, but it's probably one of the only things I could say I didn't really like that much, since I genuinely loved a lot of the seasons, since it's just good. And that's why I want to come to the big final storyline of the season. The big moment where Mob finally decides to go confess his love to Tsubomi. Tsubomi, I remember when I did my first review, I said I didn't like very much. And that was because I just wanted to fill up the time space because I couldn't remember the show too well. But this time around, I got to actually watch the show fully, just all 3 seasons at a fairly pleasant pace. And now I can confidently say I have no opinion on Tsubomi, because the only time she's ever really gotten any shine was here in season 3. And from what I have seen, she doesn't seem like a bad person. And I don't really have much of an opinion on her, as what we do see, while not bad, doesn't exactly make me fully support her and Mob getting into a relationship. It seems like it has some idea to it, but at the same time, I don't know. But moving past that for a little bit, since I do want to come back to Subomi a bit later, I just want to talk about the storyline first. It kind of blew me away. Like, I'm not that big, as I mentioned before in my last Mob Psycho review, I'm not a big fan of big, epic, crazy fight scenes. I don't really care for that. I care for an interesting and kind of deep, but not too deep. It can be kind of stupid at times. Like, I love trashy isekai stuff. I'm cool with that. But I'd like to have at least a bit of a plot with what I'm watching. And this season finale really shocked me as, well, yes, it does have a lot of action scenes I couldn't really care for. It also has a lot of heart. A lot of heart that I genuinely respect, as it's all about how after Mob gets hit by a car, I thought he would get isekai. No kidding, of course he wouldn't get isekai. But after he gets hit by a car, his brain just starts going like all frantic as he's knocked unconscious, and this other side of him that he's been bottling up just comes to fruition. And it's trying to walk towards Tsubome. And the others have to try to stop him, as almost every single character that's like a super powerful psychic tries to hold him back. Not everybody, but a good amount of the characters try to hold him back, including people like Ritsu. And I'm surprised how many people they brought back to try to stop Mob. And in the end, it's none of them that managed to stop him. It's Reagan and Dimple. As Reagan and Dimple managed to come out there, and if this wasn't spoiled for me, it would be an awesome moment, but it was spoiled for me. Reagan finally tells Mob about the truth, about how he doesn't have psychic powers. He's never had any such powers or anything like that. And Mob kind of knew this in the back of his head. Like, he knew it, but he kept wanting to deny it because he wanted to believe his master had some form of power and that he was just using him. However, that's when Reagan just admits, yes, he's been using him, and he's just trying to get through to Mob. And it's a moment that I genuinely really loved, and it just, oh man, it was so good. It's just, all these interactions between Reagan and Mob up to this point have been wholesome, but this moment where they get real and start sharing their honest feelings, especially, well, mainly Reagan does that, but seeing them interact like this was such an awesome moment for me. I really loved it. And then, you know, after that, after Reagan manages to snap him out of it, he goes over and ends up trying to confess to Subomi, only for her to say that she's never thought of him that way. And while he is sad, it turns out after the fact, the two of them start interacting more often, and apparently they're starting to gain more of a good friendship again. So I'm guessing they're trying to reconnect as friends, which is pretty cool. And this ending just had me so emotionally invested. Like, I was tearing up when I knew that this would be the end of Mob. I never knew just how much this series got into my head. I always thought that it was just kind of that back series I tuned into every now and then. But then when we reached the end and I saw how it all concluded, it dawned on me that this was the end. This was the end of Mob Psycho 100. And that actually made me a bit teary-eyed, because this season was so interesting and awesome, and I got so invested in this character of Mob and this world he's in. It's so sad to know that this is where it ends. Even so, I loved it. I absolutely loved it, and it's probably my #1 favorite season of Mob Psycho 100. It kept me invested for almost the entire series, and I enjoyed it so much. And yeah, that's all I really have to say. So we're at the conclusion of this video, and what are my final thoughts? I enjoyed it. While there are some things in there that are introduced that don't really come into play later, I still really enjoyed almost every aspect of the season, as it tied up a lot of loose ends and concluded a lot of issues I realized would have been plot holes if they just stopped at season 2. And I really enjoyed how everything wrapped up with this season. And for a finale for Mob Psycho 100, this was fantastic. And that's why I give Mob Psycho 103 a solid 9 out of 10. It was incredible. I really enjoyed it, and I just had a good time. We won't be seeing any more Mob. That was the final season, and it's a great final season. So, yeah. That's all I really have to say, so thank you all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Anime channel, don't forget to subscribe. I also can do anime fans to the channel, and I will see you all around. Peace!